So the impulse starts from the nerve, okay, the motor neuron. So that motor neuron approaches the muscle, all right. And when it approaches the muscle, this motor neuron, it starts branching out. Okay, so it will branch out. So if this is the motor nerve which has come like this, and this is the muscle over here, this is the muscle. So this motor neuron is there, it is an axon, right? So what happens is that there is this spinal cord cross section. You all remember this one that we had learned in MBBS. This is the cross section of the spinal cord, right? So the motor nerves arise from the ventral horn, if you remember. So the ventral horn of the spinal cord, which is there, from here the motor nerve will begin. All right. So the body of the neuron is over here. The body of the neuron is here, but the axon which is there, the axon, that will travel a very long distance and it will finally reach the muscle. All right. And when this axon reaches the muscle, this axon starts branching out. All right. So it will branch out. Multiple branches. All right. And these multiple branches will start forming what is known as this neuromuscular junction between each branch and that area of the muscle membrane. All right. So this is a rough idea about how the motor neuron travels from the spinal cord, taking the motor signals to the muscle. All right. And when it approaches the muscle, it starts branching out. And what else we also need to remember is that we know that there's myelin covering on on an axon, right? So the myelin sheet which is there, so it is covering it. It is covering it all throughout. All right. But when when this axon approaches the muscle and it starts bifurcating into multiple branches, it is now not covered by myelin, but there will be the Schwann cells. All right, so I'll show it in a magnified way. So if you see, there will be a myelin covering along this in the whole route. Okay, but as soon as it starts approaching the muscle, the myelin sheath will stop. And from there, from henceforth, from that, beyond that, you will have only the Schwann cells, which are covering the motor axon, okay, and its branches. So what Sandhya said was right. So we'll just revise that. So when the stimulus arises from here, the impulse travels along the nerve. Okay, it approaches the terminal endings of the nerve. Now, in the terminal endings of the nerve, we know that there are vesicles which are containing acetylcholine. So this impulse will travel. It will cause the acetylcholine vesicles to degranulate. So basically, it will come to the surface of the ending or the end plate of the nerve, and it will release acetylcholine. All right. Now, acetylcholine will release into the cleft. It will go and bind to the muscle end plate. So this over here, there are going to be receptors, acetylcholine receptors, to which the acetylcholine molecule will come and bind. All right. When it comes and binds over here, there will be a wave of depolarization which will occur. And ultimately, that wave of depolarization will cause formation of multiple end plate potentials. These end plate potentials, once they reach a threshold, an action potential will generate and this muscle will contract. Okay. Now we need to know what the exact, this is very rough view, okay, but we need to know exactly everything in detail, okay. So is this much understood, the rough idea about how transmission of the impulse occurs? Okay, so now we'll understand the structure of the neuromuscular junction, okay. So as I told you, each motor neuron travels, its axon reaches the muscle and it branches out and it comes in contact with many muscle cells, all right. So now what you will have, now we'll just now each like as this came and it branched out and formed multiple branches, and then you have this. So now we'll just take this cross section. So one branch with the muscle membrane. So that I am drawing over here. All right. So as I told you, the myelin sheath which is there, that myelin sheath is there over here. All right. There's a covering of myelin, but as it branches, this is one branch, so there are other branches also. We are only understanding the microscopic picture of one branch. So here there are Schwann cells, all right? So these are the and this is the myelin sheath. All right, is this clear, the red color? You can see it now. If any clarity problem, just tell me, okay? So now this, you know that there are going to be many vesicles inside. So what have I drawn this? This is, what is this and what is this? So I'm drawing some things. You keep telling me if you identify any of these structures, okay? Whatever I'm drawing. Yeah. So somebody said this is mitochondria. You're right. So this is mitochondria. What are these? Yeah, this. These are vesicles. Okay. What is this that I've highlighted over here, this thick thing? Any idea? Yes, this is, see, this is the cleft. This is the cleft. Okay, so this is the release site. This is known as release sites. These are the release sites. So these are the sites from where the vesicles will open up and release the acetylcholine. Okay, what is this? What is this? This is the nerve, right? What is this I've drawn over here? Yeah, so this is the muscle. Okay, the muscle is having something wavy. What is this called? These waves, what are they called? Yeah, this is the membrane. But the membrane is not straight and flat, right? It's got waves. It's curved. So what is this curves called as? Any idea? So these are basically, these are clefts. These are the primary cleft. Okay. So this, the big one is known as primary. Okay. And this, you should know that this is synaptic cleft. Now don't confuse. So this is known as synaptic cleft. Okay. The space between the nerve ending and the beginning of the muscle, this space is synaptic cleft. And the size of this space, the distance which is there is 20 nanometers. Okay, so this is 20 nanometers wide. And this is known as a neuromuscular junction cleft or the synaptic cleft. All right, this muscle membrane is corrugated. So what these waves are, you can call it corrugated. Okay, you can say they are folds. These are folds. So there is something known as primary cleft. Okay, and there's something known as secondary cleft. This is secondary cleft. Any point here you cannot appreciate my writing, let me know. So this, the big ones are primary cleft, the small ones are secondary cleft. Now why are these clefts there? They are there to increase the surface area of the muscle membrane. Okay, why? Because larger surface area means what? There'll be more space for the sodium channels, right? There'll be more space for the acetylcholine receptors to occupy, correct? So you tell me now, what is this that I'm drawing these tiny circles over here on top of the cleft? I'm drawing something. Any no, vesicles are to up, no? What are these? Yeah, receptors, correct. So these are the ACHR. I'm going to, so you understand the short form, acetylcholine receptor. Okay. So these receptors which I've drawn over here, you will notice that they're located only in particular area. Are you finding them anywhere else? Am I drawing them anywhere else? Did I draw them elsewhere? No. So they are found only at the top of the cleft. You have to remember the receptor, it's found at the top. Okay. Now I'm drawing something over here. What are these things that I'm drawing over here? Something cylindrical. Any idea? Correct. So these are sodium channels. The sodium channels, no, they are located at the base, at the bottom of the cleft. Okay, so you have to remember a few points like receptor is located at the top of the cleft. Channels are located at the bottom of the cleft. All right. So is this structure understood? Like how, where is what located? Yeah. Okay. So now these receptors which are there, no, acetylcholine receptors, how many receptors are there in each this junctional cleft? So this is known as synaptic cleft because this is a synapse, right? So it's known as synaptic cleft or neuromuscular junctional cleft. Okay. So each cleft size is 20 nanometers. Each cleft is having how many receptors? 5 million. Okay. So one cleft, that is, if you combine all these receptors in total, there are 5 million acetylcholine receptors per junctional cleft. Okay. So these are some points that we need to know. And as you know, now in the future, what we'll refer, we'll call this as muscle end plate. Okay. This is the muscle end plate on which the acetylcholine will come and act. Okay. Now we have to understand how is this acetylcholine being produced and stored in the vesicles. So where is acetylcholine produced? Is it produced in the nerve or is it produced in the muscle? Very simple. Where is acetylcholine produced? Correct. So acetylcholine is produced over here. Okay. So from the name only acetylcholine, what we understand from that, just turn the board up. Okay. So we'll understand how is it produced. So this name acetylcholine, right? We're talking about acetylcholine. So it is made up of two components, acetyl and choline, correct? So now if this is the nerve, all right, this is the nerve and we have the vesicles which are located here, all right. So before the acetylcholine neurotransmitter can enter the vesicle, it has to be produced in this nerve, correct? So now there is mitochondria, right? As we drew it in the backside. So there are two components of this. So how is it formed and from where we are getting what? So this choline which is there, it is actually located outside. This choline molecule is located outside the nerve. So there are channels through which choline will enter inside. Okay. So choline has come in now. From where are we getting acetyl? So acetyl is obtained in the form of this. It is actually acetate. Okay, it is obtained in the form of acetate and it's obtained from where? From inside, from the mitochondria. Okay, it is obtained from the mitochondria. So this mitochondria is providing me with the acetate. So what will happen? I have got acetate over here from mitochondria has given me. Choline I've got from out. Now these two will combine and I will get acetylcholine. Correct? Now, this acetylcholine will not form on its own. It will need an enzyme, correct? So, which is that enzyme? Anybody has an idea? So, the enzyme which is over here, it is choline acetyl transferase. So, this enzyme choline acetyl transferase will help in combining acetate with choline and give you acetylcholine molecule. Is this understood how acetylcholine is obtained? Yes. Now this acetylcholine molecule will then enter into the vesicle and it will be stored in the vesicles. All right. Until a nerve impulse arrives. Okay. So now we'll move ahead and we'll understand exactly how does that now action potential in the nerve. Okay. And how it comes to the muscle. So we know that there is a nerve action potential which is developed. Short form, you're comfortable, nerve action potential. So the stimulus has come on the nerve. All right. So now this is the nerve membrane. Okay. Action potential is arriving on the nerve. Okay. What will happen? The sodium will move in. There will be depolarization of the nerve membrane. That's how the action potential will travel, correct? So action potential is generated. There will be a sodium influx. All right. So there is a sodium influx happening in the nerve. This sodium influx, what does it cause? It's causing depolarization. So this is the first cation that enters inside the nerve and it starts causing depolarization of the nerve membrane. Okay. So as the nerve membrane is getting depolarized, this nerve membrane also has another channel. Which channel is this? Another cation, positively charged. So there, correct. So there are calcium channels. Now these calcium channels are voltage gated. So if we tell any channel is voltage gated means what? Any change in potential, these channels will open or close. Their opening and closing is dependent on the voltage. So depolarization wave has come. Okay, these calcium channels will open. So there will be calcium influx into the nerve membrane because these voltage gated calcium channels have opened now. Calcium influx has started occurring now. All right. Now calcium influx has started occurring. Now this calcium, what it will cause? It is entered in. So it will tell these vesicles, that will send a message to the vesicles that come on, now you have to come to the release site and release the acetylcholine. Okay, that is the function. Why the calcium is entering in? Because it goes to the vesicle. It sends the message to the vesicle that it has to come to the release site over here and release the acetylcholine. So now acetylcholine release will occur. All right. So acetylcholine release happens. But how long will this keep happening? Now, only the nerve membrane not only allow influx, right? So there is another channel which is there where there is going to be outward movement of this thing, ion. Which ion is that? Potassium. All right. So the potassium ions, you know that potassium is predominantly an intracellular ion. So this potassium which is located inside, so this will sense. So what happens is that there are two types of potassium channels over here. All right. One is what? It is calcium. It is sensed by calcium. So that's calcium activated potassium channel. So what happens? Calcium entered in, message went to potassium channel opened. All right. And the second type of potassium channel is voltage gated. So it sends that there is a change in the voltage of the nerve membrane and the potassium channel opened. So there are two types of potassium channels. Okay. Two types. So one is going to be the voltage gated. So you understand by voltage gated change in the action, the change in the voltage of the nerve membrane and the potassium channel has opened. Second thing is going to be calcium activated. So it depends upon the entry of the calcium. Okay, so calcium entered, potassium channel got the message, started doing potassium efflux. So potassium efflux has started occurring. All right. At one point, what will happen is that the conduction will stop because now the nerve, the depolarization has gone back to resting phase. The depolarized membrane, at one point, the calcium influx will stop. All right. Calcium influx will stop. Potassium efflux has also occurred. And now membrane will go back to resting potential. And that's when the acetylcholine release will stop and the nerve conduction will stop. Okay. Is this understood, the understanding of which ion comes in first? So first sodium comes in, it causes depolarization. Then then message goes to the calcium channel. Calcium channel will cause opening and entry of calcium. That message goes to vesicle. Vesicle comes and releases acetylcholine. At the same time, the depolarization wave, the change which has occurred, that all causes stimulus of the potassium channel. So potassium channels start moving the positive ions out. Potassium keeps moving out. Here positive ions are coming in, right? Calcium is coming in, sodium is coming in. Now potassium is starting to move out. So at one point it will reach a resting phase. Depolarization will stop, nerve conduction will stop, muscle, and then acetylcholine release will stop, and and the muscle contraction will stop. So is this understood? Okay. Now you tell me, if I want to, this is applied, all right? So what is understood from this is that the release of the acetylcholine depends upon the calcium. More calcium enters in, more acetylcholine will be released out. Okay. So if there is no calcium outside, no calcium entering in, there will be no release of acetylcholine. So now you can understand the relation between muscle weakness and hypocalcemia. Okay, hypocalcemia, there will be muscle weakness. So because less calcium is moving inside, less acetylcholine is getting released, and therefore the muscle contraction is less. Okay. So similarly, if you increase the calcium, okay, so in case you double the calcium concentration, double the amount of calcium is entering in, it will increase the doubling the acetylcholine release. So very important factor in acetylcholine release, strength of muscle contraction, is the calcium influx. Okay, so now afterwards ahead we'll understand how this is getting affected in the patients with eclampsia. Okay. Now another point I wanted to tell is that, can I prolong the muscle contraction? Like, is there some way? So there is one way. Okay. How can I prolong this influx? There is something which is limiting this influx, right? And that is this potassium channels. A simple thing I want to explain is that if I give potassium channel blocking drugs, if I give a drug that causes blocking of the potassium channel, then there will be influx of the calcium, right? Calcium influx will keep happening, positivity inside will increase, and that will cause the increase in the acetylcholine release. Okay, so this is one applied. If you don't remember it also, it's okay, but it's just a point that if you give potassium channel blocking drugs, calcium influx will keep happening, and there will be more acetylcholine release, and you can prolong the action of the muscle contraction. So now you want to move, let's move ahead. Okay. So now we know that there are two types of potassium channels which were located at the nerve membrane. One was voltage gated and one was calcium dependent. Okay. Now these calcium channels also which are there. So over here, as I told you, that we have even the calcium channels, right? So these calcium channels are also two types. Okay. Anybody remembers from MBBS there were two types of calcium channels? So there are the P type and the L type. Is it ringing a bell? Somewhere you remember? Yeah. So these P type of calcium channels which are there, no, they are located at the nerve endings. Everywhere in the whole body. Okay. So the nerve endings, these which are there, these are the calcium channels which are the P type. And as I told you, they are voltage dependent. Just now I told you, depolarization will occur because of sodium influx. Voltage gated calcium channels will get activated and cause the influx of calcium, right? So these are the P type. Okay, they are voltage gated and they are located at nerve endings. Okay, so these are the 3 points that we need to know, that in the neuromuscular junction at the nerve ending, the calcium channel which is there is a P type calcium channel. It is a voltage gated calcium channel. All right. Do calcium channel blocking drugs have any effect on this P type? No, they don't. Okay. So then we have to understand what is this L type. So L type, you know, have you heard of the L type? They are the slow calcium channels. Okay. These are slow calcium channels. And where are they located? In the heart. Okay. I mean to say in the cardiovascular system. So this is just another point to remember, that calcium channels are of two types. For us of importance in the neuromuscular junction is the P type. The L type is not of importance because the L type is located mainly in the cardiac system. All right. So if I give calcium channel blocking drugs, these drugs will go and act on the L type receptor calcium channels. They do not act on the P type. Okay, so somebody tells you, I'm giving the patient dilzium, okay, I'm giving the patient another, nifedipine, verapamil, all these calcium channel blocking drugs. Patient is on all these drugs. Do you think now we give him GA and you think it will affect, his nerve conducting and all that property? So you should confidently say no, because these drugs are going to act only on the heart and the cardiac tissue. They do not act upon the calcium channels located in the nerve endings. All right, so it does not interfere in the nerve conduction. Okay, so this is one thing that you have to have clear. Is this understood? So what we are mainly concerned over here is with the P type. Okay, should I go ahead? Okay, so now what we need to know is that whenever extracellularly, if there is any other divalent cation, okay, so what do I mean by divalent cation? Cation means positive charge, divalent means two charges. So that means divalent cations are going to be calcium, right? Then you have magnesium, you have manganese. Okay, so these are the divalent cations. If the concentration of any of this apart from calcium, what I'm trying to say is that if the concentration of magnesium, manganese, or any other divalent cation in your blood increases, that will interfere with the entry of the calcium into the nerve. Is this clear? If the concentration of any of these divalent cations increases in the blood, it will interfere with the entry of calcium into the nerve. It will inhibit the entry, it will prevent it. So, if you have a patient who is having PIH, okay, she is on magnesium treatment. So that means her blood serum magnesium levels will be high. Yes. So this high magnesium levels will prevent the entry of calcium into the nerve. And because it prevents the entry of calcium into the nerve, as we have learned, entry of calcium happens, then only acetylcholine will release. More calcium entry means more acetylcholine. So now calcium entries become restricted because of magnesium, right? So less calcium is entering in, therefore less acetylcholine will be released, therefore they can have muscle weakness. All right. So that is why this is important for us as anesthetists to know that if patient is receiving any magnesium treatment. Okay, so is this clear or is there any confusion? So nerve conduction will be slow, muscle contraction will be weak. Okay, but this is a benefit to which drug? A relaxant. So even less dose of relaxant will cause profound paralysis in this patient. So if this patient, suppose she is not going for any surgery, okay, but she's receiving magnesium, you know that we check for the reflexes, right? Yeah. So what is reflexes? Reflexes, that only you're seeing, right? If the reflexes get blunted, means what? Magnesium levels are high, calcium entry has become less, and therefore the reflex is not happening. The muscle contraction is not happening. Okay. But if this patient comes for surgery, okay, and we give her general anesthesia and we give her a relaxant, so now already the calcium entry is quite less. Already acetylcholine that is released is so little in the cleft. Very little acetylcholine is coming here and binding to the muscle, right? So majority of the receptors are free, sitting free, because acetylcholine release is only less. Majority receptors are sitting free. The muscle relaxant will go and occupy all these receptors. Correct? And additionally, what is happening now? Calcium entry is also less. So at the end of the surgery, when you expect I should have a decent concentration of acetylcholine in the cleft, right? What you will think, okay, the case is over and now it's been half an hour since my last atracurium. I think the patient should be out of relaxant because you expect what atracurium has moved out from the receptor and the receptors are vacant. You're right, receptors are vacant. But the amount of acetylcholine that is available in the cleft is so less because the calcium is not entering only inside. It's having so much difficulty to come in. So you understood the mechanism why they are having muscle weakness, why they are having delayed recovery from paralysis after GA. No confusion in this, right? The cause is that calcium entry is less, therefore acetylcholine quantity in the cleft in the neuromuscular junction is less. Less molecules of acetylcholine means less muscle contraction. So at the end of the surgery also, you will find this muscle weakness. Okay. So now we have to understand, we have time, no? I don't know. If the meeting gets, this thing, they'll just join on the same link. Huh? So now we know that there are vesicles which are containing the storing acetylcholine, right? So there are two types of vesicles. Okay. So there are two types which we need to know. I think we'll keep it like this. Okay. So far there are two pools. Okay. So one is the readily there's a readily releasable pool. Okay. And then there is a reserve pool. So what does this mean? There are two pools of vesicles which are located in the nerve ending. One is a readily releasable, means action potential came, it will quickly move to the active sites and release the acetylcholine. Okay. So these are the ones which are used first, which get mobilized first. Okay. And these are small vesicles. All right. Reserve pool is which they are larger size. They are larger than these. These vesicles are larger and they're located quite deep in the nerve. So if you consider this as the nerve ending, so the small vesicles will be located quite close, to the nerve ending. But the big vesicles which are then are located far away. All right. They're located a little far away. And these are held by the cytoskeleton structure which is there inside the cell. So it's held by those cytoskeleton structures, okay, in place over there. So what happens? Then the reserve pool will be mobilized. Now this is readily available, right? Readily releasable. The name only saying quickly it is available for release. If the nerve is continuously stimulated, okay, very high frequency, repeat stimulus, or it is stimulated constantly for a very long time, one stimulus going on for a very long time, that's the time when this will get exhausted. Okay, if this gets exhausted, no, then the reserve pool is mobilized. Okay, and the acetylcholine from the reserve pool is used. So is this part understood, that there are two vesicles? Yeah, so this is near the nerve ending, and this is located deeper, or maybe you can say away, far away. Okay, far away from the nerve ending. Okay, now this is the only difference, and this is known as VP2. Okay, and this is known as VP1. Ulta it is, like readily releasable, the one which is available at the first is known as VP2. This is known as VP1. That's it. Nothing more in depth. Now these vesicles, we know that they will, if this is the nerve membrane, right? And this is suppose the release site, this. Okay. So the vesicle has to come, okay, the vesicle is over here. It has to come and bind to the release site, So this binding is facilitated by something known as the snare protein. So snare protein helps the vesicles to come and attach. That means what? Fusion, docking, and release. Okay. So these are responsible for fusion, docking, and the release of acetylcholine. Okay. So fusion docking of the vesicles is helped by the snare protein. Okay. And then it will help in the release of the acetylcholine from the vesicles. That is the role of snare protein. Okay. Just to help it attach over here. Is this understood? Very simple. Okay, so there are something known as snare proteins. Multiple examples are there. If you don't remember, it's okay. Just remember the snare protein is responsible for helping the vesicles to fuse, dock, and release. That's it. Now we have to understand acetylcholine esterase. All right. Short form, I will use this, okay? Everybody familiar with this acetylcholine esterase short form? Okay, so where is this enzyme produced? Where is it manufactured? Is it manufactured in the nerve? Is it manufactured in the plasma? Is it manufactured in the muscle? Where is it manufactured? In wrong. Any other guess? No. Now we are left with muscle. So it is made in muscle end plate. Okay. So the end plate region which is there no of the muscle, the membrane, just over there near that membrane only it is manufactured. Okay. Now, and then this enzyme is released gradually into the cleft. It's produced in the muscle and released into the cleft. Okay. And what does it do? What is its action is what? Correct. So it is going to destroy acetylcholine neurotransmitter. It destroys it so fast, it takes less than 1 millisecond. Less than 1 millisecond and it will destroy the acetylcholine molecule. Okay, so now we are going to understand what are the post-junctional acetylcholine receptors, okay, and how is their structure. The acetylcholine receptors. All right, so there are 3 isoforms which have been identified. All right, there are 3 isoforms. So we shall try to understand all 3 of those isoforms. All right, so first you have which are known as the junctional or also known as the mature receptors. The second which you got are the extrajunctional. The extrajunctional, also known as the immature type. All right, and then the third which you have are the neuronal type, also known as the alpha 7 type. All right. So we have to understand these 3 isoforms of these acetylcholine receptors. Now, acetylcholine receptor, the receptor itself has got 3 isoforms, as we know. Each receptor is made up of 5 subunits. All right. Be it junctional, extrajunctional, or neuronal, each of them is made up of 5 subunits. Okay, so we'll understand the structure of those 5 subunits. So in the junctional type, if we draw it, all right. So now we have what is the alpha 1 subunit, the beta 1, the delta, the second alpha subunit, and then you have the epsilon subunit. All right. So, and the extrajunctional. Now, if we see the structure of the extrajunctional, this also has got 5 subunits. All right. So it also has alpha subunits. There are 2 alpha subunits, just like this junctional mature receptor. Even the extrajunctional immature receptor has got 2 alpha subunits. Okay. And it also has a delta subunit. It also has a beta 1 subunit, just like the junctional. The only difference is over here that there is going to be a gamma subunit. So you can see the difference between the junctional and extrajunctional. It's a difference only between one of the subunits, which is the epsilon subunit is present in the junctional, whereas the extrajunctional has got the gamma subunit. Rest all the subunits are the same. Okay. Then you have the neuronal type, which is also known as alpha 7. So from the name itself, we come to know that all the receptor, all the subunits are alpha 7 type. All right. So there are 5 subunits over here and they're all the alpha 7 type. Okay. Now, what is the property of this junctional receptor? So these junctional receptors, they're open for short time, for shorter period of time. All right. Whereas the extra junctional, different. They are open for longer time. All right. Then there's another property. This junctional receptor, which is a mature, will conduct high amplitude currents. All right. So it will conduct high amplitude current, whereas the extrajunctional will be conducting low amplitude currents. Okay, what do I mean by this conducting the current? Now, as I've told you that this is a receptor, right? So the acetylcholine receptor, which is made up of 5 subunits surrounding a cylindrical pore. All right, so there is a cylindrical pore in the center. This cylindrical pore will allow the movement of ions across the membrane, across the muscle membrane. All right, so this is a transmembrane receptor. This receptor is neuronal receptor. The only point that we need to know is that this neuronal receptor, which is there, the neuronal subtype, that is going to have 5 subunits made up of alpha 7. All right. Now, what we also need to know is that muscle relaxants can block all the three isoforms of this acetylcholine receptor. All right. Now, where is this acetylcholine receptor synthesized? All right. So, we'll take it on the whiteboard. So we need to know some points about the acetylcholine receptor. All right. So the acetylcholine receptor, I'm denoting it with the letter R. So this receptor is produced by muscle. All right. So it is within the muscle. If this is the muscle, it is produced within the muscle. All right. And then it comes and it is located at the muscle membrane, the acetylcholine receptor. All right. So it is produced in the muscle. It is synthesized in the muscle. Okay. It is attached. So this receptor has to be attached to the muscle membrane, right? If it how it needs some support to attach. So it is attached with the help of attached to the muscle membrane with what is the name of that molecule? It is rapsin. R-A-P-S-Y-N. Rapsin. All right. So it is attached with the help of rapsin in the ratio 1:1. What does that mean? Each acetylcholine receptor is attached to the membrane with the help of one rapsin molecule. All right. Then, now as I told you, now the structure of the acetylcholine receptor, right? So it is made up of these 5 subunits. All right. And it is in the form of a cylinder. So inside this, here the space within through this channel. So this is the channel, all right, which allows the movement of ions. All right. So ions can move in and out through this channel, all right, across the muscle membrane. Okay. And this is in the form of a cylinder. The shape of it is cylindrical. Now, very important point is that on which subunit of the 5 subunits of the acetylcholine receptor will the neurotransmitter acetylcholine bind. All right. Very, very important. So acetylcholine binds to alpha subunit. This is a very important statement that you have to remember, that acetylcholine molecule binds to the alpha subunit only. It will not bind to the gamma, it will not bind to the delta, to the epsilon, none. It has affinity and goes and binds only to the alpha subunit. All right. And what is the weight of each receptor? All right. So each acetylcholine receptor has a weight. Okay. So receptor weight is given in 250,000 Daltons. All right, that is the weight of one acetylcholine receptor. The weight is 250,000 Daltons. Okay, so now what we need to understand next is that all right. So if I have a receptor, so if this is a receptor, all right, acetylcholine receptor with its 5 subunits, all right. So here, what I have drawn, what is this form of the acetylcholine receptor? All right. So this acetylcholine receptor right now is in this closed state. It is closed. Okay. It's not allowing any flow of any ions across the across the pore. All right. So right now it is closed. It is inactive. Okay. The receptor is inactive. Now, if I tell you on this receptor, all right. So suppose this is the receptor. All right. I'm drawing it another one. So this is the receptor. And now what has happened is that one molecule of acetylcholine has arrived. All right. So I'm denote, and it has come and attached to this alpha subunit. So this is the alpha subunit, and this is the acetylcholine molecule has come and bound to that alpha subunit. This receptor will not open. All right. One molecule over here of acetylcholine has attached, all right, to the alpha subunit. Right, is what I've shown over here. The receptor, the channel will still remain closed. Channel remains closed. You need to understand this very carefully. So channel is going to still remain closed. All right. Why? Why is that? Because for every receptor to open, every channel to open, minimum 2 acetylcholine, we need two acetylcholine molecules to go and bind to both the alpha subunits. All right. So we need to remember one very important point, which I'm going to put it in the box over here, that for the channel to open, 2 acetylcholine molecules should bind to the 2 alpha subunits. This is a very, very, very important point. So now since over here one molecule only has come and bound to only one of the alpha subunits, this channel will remain closed. All right. But now if I have this receptor over here, all right. And what has happened over here is that one acetyl molecule has come over here. This is one acetylcholine molecule has come and bound to the alpha subunit. The second acetylcholine molecule has also come and bound to the alpha subunit. So here I've got 2 acetylcholine molecules coming and binding to the alpha subunit. Now there will occur a conformational change. A conformational change in the acetylcholine receptor. All right. So there will be a conformational change and the channel will open. All right. So now what will happen? The channel will open now because so let's show how the channel opens. All right. So the subunits start moving far away from each other. All right. So the channel has opened. You can clearly see the channel has opened, and we can have the influx of sodium. We can have the influx of calcium. Correct. And there will also occur efflux of potassium. All right. So this is that point when 2 acetylcholine molecules will come and attach to the receptor. That is the time the receptor will undergo conformational change, allowing the movement of ions across the channel. All right. Now, in case, all right. So here I have a channel on top over here. Okay. And now what has happened is that there is a molecule of relaxant which has come and bound to it. Okay. I have put a molecule of relaxant. Let's assume that this is vecuronium. So right now what has happened is that vecuronium has come and bound to the receptor. Because vecuronium has come and bound to the receptor, right now acetylcholine cannot bind to the receptor. All right. So acetylcholine cannot bind to the receptor. Hence, this receptor goes in the inactive phase. All right. It is not available for acetylcholine binding. All right. So this here, the channel will not open. Will not open. Okay, because of the relaxant which has gone and attached. Okay. So we also need to remember, so there are some points that we need to know. If one molecule of acetylcholine goes and binds, the receptor is going to be inactive, channel is going to be closed. Two molecules of acetylcholine are required for the receptor to undergo a conformational change and for opening of the channel and allowing the influx and efflux of ions. All right. If a relaxant has gone and bound to the receptor, the channel will not open and there will be no conductance of any currents across this channel. All right, which I mean is that there will be no flow of any ions across the channel. Okay, now we need to understand that there is this vecuronium here, right? So there is a competition. There's a competitive mechanism, all right, between the agonist and antagonist of the receptor. So by agonist, what do I mean? I have acetylcholine, all right? And by the antagonist, I mean the non-depolarizing muscle relaxant. So I hope this short form is clear, non-depolarizing muscle relaxant. And here I am saying acetylcholine. So there is a competitive mechanism between the agonist and the antagonist for occupying this receptor. There's always a phase of competition between them. So if the concentration of the agonist, if the concentration of acetylcholine increases greatly in the neuromuscular junction, that is in the cleft, that is when it will go and displace the antagonist, which is the vecuronium over here in this case. It will displace that and occupy its two spaces, which is the two alpha subunits. It will go and occupy those two alpha subunits and displace this vecuronium. All right. So when we give, now what happens when we give a reversal agent? All right. So when we give a reversal agent, which is the reversal agent we use? It is neostigmine. Most commonly, what we are using is neostigmine. All right. So neostigmine, what is the property? It is an anti-choline esterase enzyme or a drug. All right. So what does it do? It prevents the, it is anti-choline esterase. So choline esterase, as we know, is the enzyme that is required to metabolize and destroy the acetylcholine in the neuromuscular junction. So if we block, this enzyme is blocked, choline esterase is blocked, it will cause increase in the concentration of the acetylcholine molecules in the neuromuscular junction. The concentration of acetylcholine molecules will increase, and this will start displacing out. It concentration of acetylcholine will increase, and by the time you're giving the relaxant, the case is almost coming to the end. The surgery is almost coming to the end. It's been almost half an hour, 40 minutes since your last relaxant dose. All right. So therefore, the concentration of the relaxant which is available in the neuromuscular junction has decreased drastically, because over these last 30 to 40 minutes, the relaxant has gradually, it has gone initially attached to all those receptors, but gradually it has started diffusing out, separating from the receptors, going into the bloodstream, going to the liver and getting metabolized and getting eliminated from the body. All right. So hence, because of this continuous metabolism of the relaxant, the concentration of the relaxant in the neuromuscular junction has now dropped. All right. So there's a drop in the concentration of the relaxant, whereas there's now the increase in the concentration of acetylcholine in the neuromuscular junction because we are given the drug neostigmine. All right. So this sudden burst and increase of acetylcholine in the neuromuscular junction will now have, there'll be a competition. So it will competitively displace the relaxant, the remaining relaxant which is occupying the receptors, and it will go and occupy those spaces, and that is how the reversal agent works, and that is how we know that there's a competitive mechanism between the agonist and the antagonist for the acetylcholine receptor. Okay, but now if somebody tells me that what if I give neostigmine to the patient, like immediately within some time after giving a relaxant? All right, suppose you have induced the case has just begun, you are given a loading dose of the relaxant, all right, the initial dose, and within 15-20 minutes the case is over, but you know that this is not the right time to reverse the patient. So why is it not the right time to reverse the patient? It is not the right time because the metabolism of that drug is incomplete right now. The metabolism of that relaxant is incomplete. So what has happened is that there is, if initially there was a significant concentration at the beginning of the case of the relaxant in the neuromuscular junction, so over time, over the next 45 minutes, 1 hour, the relaxant gradually diffuses out. It gradually starts detaching from the acetylcholine receptors. It moves to the blood, moves to the organs, gets metabolized and eliminated. So that is how we ensure that at the end of the case, we expect that if there is a normal metabolism that is occurring in the body, the concentration of the relaxant in the junction would have decreased. And at this point, the acetylcholine can compete against the antagonist at the junction. All right. But if the case has just begun and within 15 minutes you want to give neostigmine, all right, so you have a significant concentration or very large concentration of relaxant in the junction. So to overcome that large concentration of relaxant in the junction is not easy. You might give neostigmine and you might temporarily be able to increase the concentration of acetylcholine in the junction. But and that acetylcholine might also land up displacing the relaxant from the receptor and occupying the receptor, which gives you a feeling that the patient has been reversed. But we are mistaken. We have to keep in mind that acetylcholine, although maybe it would have temporarily surpassed the concentration of the antagonist, it may have competitively overcome the antagonist and displaced the antagonist from the receptor, occupy the receptor. But we know that this acetylcholine has a very short lifespan in the neuromuscular junction. It will immediately detach from the receptor and it gets immediately metabolized by acetylcholine esterase within less than 1 millisecond. So after some time, you will note that the patient is going back into paralysis. That is because the concentration of the relaxant is still significant in the junction. So once the acetylcholine molecule detaches from the receptor, the relaxant molecule finds an opportunity to go and reattach to the receptor. Hence, we always should ensure that we reverse at a time when we expect that the concentration in the junction is the least. All right. Because as we know, even only one molecule of relaxant is required to block the receptor. But we need two molecules to open the receptor for the acetylcholine. We need two molecules of acetylcholine to activate the receptor. All right. Two molecules of agonist are required versus only one molecule of antagonist. All right. So if the relaxant concentration, what is that means? I'm saying if vecuronium concentration is doubled, it is 2 times, then we need an acetylcholine concentration which is 4 times in the junction to overcome it. All right. Now, but that is not the case with another drug that we have heard of, all right, which is known as Sugamadex. All right. So there is this drug called Sugamadex. It is a cyclodextrin. All right. So it is a cyclodextrin compound. All right. And the property of Sugamadex is that it will envelope the relaxant molecule within its core. All right. So if this is the relaxant molecule, it will just engulf the relaxant molecule, trap it inside the molecule, inside Sugamadex, and it will not release it. So we know for sure the relaxant has been trapped in. It cannot come out. It cannot cause residual paralysis. It cannot cause paralysis again. All right. Hence, Sugamadex can be used immediately after inducing a case also, or you've just given a relaxant to the patient. Within some time, you want to reverse the patient. Sugamadex is the drug you should be using. You should not be using neostigmine at that time when you have just used a relaxant. All right. So now let's understand how do depolarizing muscle relaxants work. All right. So we need to know how does choline actually work. So what is the action of the depolarizing muscle relaxant? All right, what is the action of this relaxant? So this relaxant means which relaxant I'm talking about? I'm talking about succinylcholine. All right, so there are a few properties of succinylcholine. All right, its structure is similar to acetylcholine. All right, it has a biphasic action. What do I mean by that? So first, it will cause muscle contraction, all right? And after that, it will cause a secondary relaxation. So initially, it will cause a contraction and then it will cause muscle relaxation, all right? How is the structure of succinylcholine? So they are two molecules of acetylcholine, all right? There are two molecules of acetylcholine that are bound to each other. So there are two acetylcholine molecules that are bound to each other, which forms succinylcholine. All right. And the duration of succinylcholine, so the duration of action of action, it is short. All right. This is a benefit of using the depolarizing muscle relaxant as compared to the non-depolarizing because the duration of action is short. All right. But the action can be prolonged. Action may be prolonged when in certain cases where the metabolism of the succinylcholine is affected. All right. So how does this succinylcholine get metabolized? Does it get metabolized in the neuromuscular junction? No, it does not. Which is the enzyme which metabolizes succinylcholine? So it is the plasma pseudocholine esterase enzyme. All right. It is the plasma pseudocholine esterase enzyme which metabolizes the succinylcholine. So as we know, it is found in the plasma. All right. So the action may be prolonged if the plasma pseudocholine esterase is deficiency. If there is deficiency in the enzyme, deficiency in enzyme, which enzyme? Plasma pseudocholine esterase. All right. So these are the few properties of succinylcholine. Now, how does it act? Initially, it causes depolarization, as I said. All right. So what does succinylcholine do? It's structurally same as acetylcholine. All right. So as soon as we have given it intravenously, it has come to the blood. It has entered the neuromuscular junction. It has reached the neuromuscular junction. Now it will go and bind to the acetylcholine receptor. All right. So succinylcholine molecule will bind to the receptor and cause depolarization. But as you know, its mechanism of action and its behavior is very similar to acetylcholine. Hence, it will bind to the receptor and it will detach. It will bind, detach, bind, detach. It will repeatedly keep binding and detaching until and unless its concentration in the junction does not decrease. All right. So as long as you have succinylcholine molecules existing in the neuromuscular junction, they will repeatedly attach and detach from the receptor. Every time they attach, they will cause a wave of depolarization. All right, at the muscle end plate, they will generate muscle end plate potentials every time they attach because the receptor will open. Receptor will open and cause the inflow of the ions. All right, so it will cause muscle end plate potentials. But the problem is that it will cause repeated depolarization, and after repeated depolarization, there will be a phase of muscle relaxation. So in the next part, we'll understand how does this muscle phase of repeated muscle contraction then ultimately reach to relaxation. So as we know, as if the concentration of the succinylcholine is significant in the junction, each and every molecule will constantly bind, release, and this binding and release causes the generation of muscle action potential and muscle contraction, and that's why you got muscle fasciculations, which you will see when you use succinylcholine. All right. But as you know, after the muscle fasciculations disappear, the patient goes into complete muscle relaxation. So why does that complete muscle relaxation occur? We shall understand that. All right. So now first we need to understand the parts of the muscle membrane. So if this is a muscle membrane, okay, if this is a muscle cell, all right, and this is the muscle membrane, and here we have, suppose, a nerve ending which has come and is forming this is forming the neuromuscular junction, right? So this portion of the neuromuscular junction is known as the junctional region, okay? It's known as the junctional or the end plate region. Okay, within this part, then you have the portion which is just adjacent to the junctional region. You have the portion of the muscle membrane that is just adjacent to the junctional region, and this portion is known as extrajunctional. All right, so this is known as the extrajunctional part, and this is the remaining muscle membrane. It doesn't have any name, it's just the muscle membrane. All right. Basically, this is also muscle membrane, but it's given a name, junctional and extrajunctional portion of the muscle membrane. Now, this is known as junctional portion of the muscle membrane because it's forming a neuromuscular junction with the nerve endings. And this is extrajunctional because it's located adjacent to the junctional area. And this is the remaining of the muscle membrane. All right. So now how does succinylcholine act? So first we'll understand that in the extrajunctional portion, okay, in this extrajunctional portion, there are some channels, all right? There are some channels located over here. Okay, what are these channels? These are actually sodium channels and which are voltage gated. So in the extra junctional part over here, you have the voltage gated sodium channels located. All right. So now we'll understand how does this voltage gated sodium channel work. Okay. So if I take this as a structure of the sodium channel, which is located in the, let's draw it again. So this is the junctional part. This is the extra junctional part, right? And here we have the sodium channels. We have the voltage gated. Okay. This is the junctional. This is the extra junctional. And this is the muscle membrane. Okay. So here we have the sodium channel. All right. Now, how does this sodium channel work? So the sodium channel, which is there in the extra junctional portion, has got two gates. All right. The sodium channel. So we need to know this sodium channel has got certain properties. It is, first of all, it is voltage gated. All right. It has got two gates. Okay. This channel has got two gates. So there is one gate on the top, right? And there is one more gate at the bottom. Okay. So there are two gates. The gate on the top, all right, this is known as the voltage gate. And the gate at the bottom is known as the time gate. All right. So I hope this is visible to everybody. Okay, so this, we have got two gates. One is the voltage gate on the top, and then you have the time gate, which is at the bottom. So at rest, all right, when there is no transmission of impulses happening, all right now there is at rest, the motor nerve is not passing any impulses to the muscle membrane. So the extra junctional portion, the sodium channels over here, they will be at rest, all right. So at rest, what you will find is that this voltage gated channel is going to be closed. All right. So what you will find if I draw this more magnified over here. Okay. So you will find that this voltage gated channel is completely closed. Okay. And the time channel is open. So at rest, if you take this at rest, okay, that is the time when no currents are flowing. That is the time when no impulses are coming. The voltage gate is closed. Obviously, it will be closed because there's no current coming, there's no voltage sensed over there. So the gate will be closed. And this time gate over here, okay, it is open. At a time, both the gates won't be closed. So the time gate over here, if you can see, it is open. The time gate is open, voltage gate is closed. Okay, at a rest when there is no conduction of impulses. Now, an impulse has come. Okay, an impulse has come along the nerve. All right, the junctional region, motor end plate, which is the motor end plate has undergone depolarization. All right, so the depolarization has occurred over here at the motor end plate, and motor end plate potentials have been generated. This will be sensed by the extra junctional part. The extra junctional region of the muscle membrane will sense that there is, okay, there is a voltage change, there's depolarization occurring over here in the junctional region. I sensed it. Voltage gate has sensed it. So voltage gate will now open. All right. Voltage gate will now open because it has sensed. All right. So it has opened. Our time gate was already open only over here. Voltage gate is now open. Now time gate also has opened. Now what will happen? The sodium will start influxing. There will be influx of sodium when both the gates are open, when the depolarization has occurred in the junctional region. The extra junctional region has sensed it. The sodium channels over here have sensed it. The voltage gated sodium channel, now the voltage gate will open. time gate was already open, all right, and now there is influx of sodium occurring over here. So now there is an influx of sodium occurring in the extrajunctional part as well, and now that will cause depolarization of the extrajunctional membrane, and that will again message will pass on to the remaining muscle membrane, and there'll be depolarization over all of the muscle membrane, and the muscle will contract. But can the muscle be contracting all the time? No. So that is why we have the role of time gate. So time gate will sense, okay, now the time is up, I have to close. I can't be open all the time. So the time gate will be like, enough of transmission, I'm closing. Time gate closed, sodium entry stopped. All right. So now time gate has closed. Now what has happened? The time gate has closed, influx of sodium has stopped. All right. And as the conduction of the impulse stops, right? As the impulse, the nerve, the messages from the nerve stop coming, that is the time when the region of the motor end plate potentials will go back to resting potential, right? At some point, this will go back to resting. So this went back to resting. So even the extra junction in the sense, oh, the voltage change has gone. It's gone back to resting. Now even I should close. Okay. Now even voltage gate has sensed that in the center, in the junctional region over here, the voltage change has gone back to its resting phase. Even I will close now. So voltage gate will close because there is no more change in voltage. Voltage gate closed. Okay. Time gate is sensing, yes, voltage has closed. Now I can open and be relaxed. Nobody is going to flow. There's going to be no flow of sodium. And I can be relaxed because now voltage gate has closed. So now time gate will go back to open. Now time gate has gone back to open. It has opened over here. And we have come back to what is the resting level. Okay. We have come back to the resting stage of the sodium channel. All right. This is happening when this is happening normally during nerve conduction, when normally acetylcholine is released. Now, what are we talking about? Now we are talking about choline, succinylcholine. All right. So now succinylcholine is going to arrive over here. It's reached the neuromuscular junction and it has gone and attached to the acetylcholine receptors. And as I told you, it goes and binds, attaches, binds, detach, bind, detach. Repeatedly it's binding and detaching unless and until it's cleared from the junction, right? It has to go to the plasma to get cleared. Until unless it doesn't go to the plasma, it will not get cleared. So the quantity of succinylcholine is quite significant over here, right? So it's binding and releasing, binding, releasing. So when it does that, it causes a depolarization over here in the junctional region, right? So that depolarization is sensed by whom? The extrajunctional region, which is having the sodium channels, the voltage gated sodium channels. Voltage gated sodium channels sense, oh my God, there's repeated depolarization occurring. The voltage is changing. I have to open. All right. So voltage gate is opening. Voltage gate opened. Okay. So now voltage gate has opened. What will the time gate do now? Initially, when the choline has come, okay, and first time it has come and attached over there, that time gate was already open. So from the resting phase, now what has happened is time gate was already open in the resting. Now also it's open. It's allowing the sodium to come in. Normally, right? Like how we saw in acetylcholine, sodium is coming in. Sodium came in, extrajunctional membrane got depolarized. Depolarization passed on to the remaining muscle membrane and the muscle membrane contracted. Now what is happening in choline? Now what is happening is that normally now what will happen? The time gate doesn't care who is coming. Choline, acetylcholine, it does not care. Only thing it cares about is time. Time gate has sensed now, I have to stop. All right, I have to stop this influx. I have to close my gate. So time gate closed. All right, just like we expect it normally to occur because time gate has a limit. And the sodium influx has now stopped. But now what is happening is that this voltage gate is still going to remain open. Why? Because succinylcholine molecules are attaching, detaching, attaching, detaching, attaching. As long as they keep attaching and detaching, they keep doing that. As long as that is going to happen, there's going to be changes in the voltage over here in the muscle end plate. And that is obviously going to be sensed by the extrajunctional voltage gated sodium channels. As long as voltage changes keep happening over here, this one is going to keep its voltage gate open. Its voltage gate is going to be remaining open only. But now what has happened? Voltage gate is open, but sodium is not going in, right? Time gate has understood I have to do my work and close. So now sodium entry is not happening. So now sodium entry is not happening anymore. Initially it was happening. Now it is not happening. So now sodium entry has stopped. Okay, because time gate has closed. So extrajunctional portion has gone back to what? It has gone back to the resting. All right, it's gone back to its resting membrane potential. All right. This has gone to resting membrane potential. So the adjacent muscle membrane is also not sensing. Even he'll be like, okay, extra junction has gone to resting membrane potential, even I'll go to resting membrane potential. And that is when you will observe that relaxation of the muscles occur because of scoline. All right. That is when relaxation occurs. So after initial contraction of the muscle, later that's when the relaxation occurs. That is when the time gate closes, the changes in the potential do not occur in the extrajunctional membrane, goes back to resting membrane potential, and so does the remaining of the muscle membrane. All right. When finally the succinyl choline will get cleared out from the neuromuscular junction, all right, at some point it will diffuse out from the NMJ, it will go to the blood and the plasma. So in the plasma, the pseudocholine esterase will destroy the scoline, right? So at some point, the scoline quantity will start decreasing in the junction, and the junction is now open, it's free. Acetylcholine can come and bind. So now what happens is once the scoline gets washed out and there is no more scoline, the voltage gate will close. All right. Voltage gate will close. Once all the scoline is washed out, voltage gate will close because there's no more voltage sensing, no more voltage changes happening. Voltage gate will close. And now what we know, when the voltage gate closes, the time gate can now take a break and open up. All right. It doesn't have to be closed. So now the time gate will open and we are back to the resting. We are back to the resting state of the sodium channel. All right. So this is how the scoline acts by causing initial contraction followed by relaxation. All right. And this phase, that phase during which the relaxation occurs, that is also known as a phase of accommodation. All right. Now we'll understand what is desensitization block and phase 2 block. They're very short and simple topics, nothing heavy. All right. So we have something which is known as the Now, why does this desensitization block occur? All right. Normally, an agonist will come and bind to the acetylcholine receptor. A conformational change will happen in the acetylcholine receptor. The channel will open, influx of ions will occur. All right, and ions will flow. Sometimes what happens is that agonist, all right, the agonist molecule binds to the receptor. So it binds to the receptor, but no conformational change happens. And therefore, no opening of channel. So there are some receptors when sometimes the agonist goes and binds, the receptor doesn't sense it and the receptor doesn't understand that it has to open up the channel, right? So these receptors are called as desensitized. So these receptors are known as desensitized receptors, all right? So now what will happen is that, because suppose I say there are 10 receptors, okay? Out of 10 receptors, if I say 4 receptors, 5 receptors got desensitized, they are not responding to acetylcholine, they're not responding to any agonist. That leaves me what, that those receptors are just not working. They are not transmitting any impulses, right? They're not allowing the transmission of any ions. It's not causing muscle contraction. So because of this, already there's some amount of muscle weakness, all right? Because a large chunk of the receptors have become desensitized. Now I am left with very few receptors which can actually do their work, right? So at this point, if I give a relaxant to this patient will be more sensitive to the relaxant action, right? Because he's already having muscular weakness because of the desensitized receptors. The remaining normal receptors are getting blocked by the muscle relaxant. So there'll be much more profound effect of the muscle relaxant in these types of patients who have got desensitized receptors. All right. So there is a list in Miller's of the drugs which are responsible for causing desensitization of receptors. All right. Next, what we need to understand is that what is a phase 2 block? All right. So phase 2 block is a block. It's a very complex. Okay. So now Exact mechanisms are not understood. There are multiple theories behind it, why it occurs. So it's a complex phenomenon. All right. It in this, what you will observe, a fade is seen. Okay, fade is seen in the train of four. All right. So I hope you guys remember train of four. You have these switches. All right. So if I give a patient this depolarizing drug like choline, so there will be no fade, which means the impulses will equally diminish. There will be equal diminution of all the four impulses until the relaxant action is complete. All right. But if I use a non-depolarizing, so it will be visible something like this. This is known as fade. All right. So how it will appear? The height will gradually decrease. All right. So gradually as the action occurs, this is the way. So this is known as fade. All right. So this fade is not a property of the depolarizing drugs. But this fade will be observed when you do your neuromuscular monitoring if phase 2 block occurs. So when will phase 2 block occur? It will occur when there is a continuous exposure to depolarizing agent. All right. So if I give a patient succinylcholine constantly beyond his, in a concentrated form, beyond a safe dose limit, that is the time I will risk putting the patient in a phase 2 block. All right. Now, the fade, why is that fade seen? Now, there are some reasons that have been provided, that it is because the succinylcholine goes and interacts with the acetylcholine receptors located in the nerve endings. So, just to not get confused, I'm just mentioning it that there are acetylcholine receptors that are located at the nerve endings, and that is where probably the relaxant is binding. All right. It is because of the repeated, you're giving such a long duration of depolarizing agent, there is repeated opening of the channels, okay? A lot of influx and efflux of ions happening. So that is one of the causes. The influx of calcium, there's such a great amount of influx of calcium that calcium can cause destruction of the muscle enteric region. All right. So that could be one of the reasons for getting this fade. All right. Now, what is responsible for causing the phase 2 block? Obviously, we know it is the depolarized, continuous exposure to the depolarizing agent. All right. So the dose of the depolarizing agent, if it's more, if you're using a very concentrated form, and which depolarizing agent you're using, these factors will determine the occurrence of the phase 2 block. When a phase 2 block occurs, you are not supposed to give a reversal agent. You will see a fade, but it is not recommended that you give a reversal agent to overcome this. All right. So here is where we complete neuromuscular physiology.